Okay, I hope everybody's okay if we get started. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning on our panel discussion. It's a bit of a new format that we're trying here at Moderna. We did quite a successful panel discussion last year, so we thought we'll try it again this year. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. We have enabled the Q&A sessions on the webinar, so to all attendees, there should be a Q&A button. Any questions that you would like to ask of the panelists, please input them there. We've also enabled a beta feature from Zoom that allows us to upvote questions. So please feel free to interact via the Q&A session. And we will try and make sure that we get and answer all questions as they come up. The intention of today's discussion is to have a bit of a coffee table chat around BIM, the promises of BIM, what needs to be done in the future to make it better, what's working, what's not working. It's not a discussion to push any specific piece of software or anything like that. So it's really an open discussion to look at what's going well, what's working, what's not working, and what we can do as a community to take things forward. I thought it would be nice to quickly get the panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with going from left to right on our screen. Garry, would you please feel free to introduce yourself? Take 2 or 3 minutes.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity, Jay. I'm Garry Mansfield. I'm CKR Consulting Engineers, and I'm currently their BIM manager.
Hannes? Thank you, Garry.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm Wagner from Structured Projects. Some of you guys might know us, but we're still a relatively new company, only 8 years old. Yeah, and I'm currently heading up the firm and also driving the technology together with Moderna.
Thank you, Hannes. Machiel?
Morning, everyone. I'm Machiel from Moderna. I'm the technical manager for Moderna AEC and infrastructure, and driving all the solutions for our clients and assisting them on adoptions of technologies.
And last but not least, Kevin.
Good morning, everybody. Kevin Hinde, A3 Architects. I suppose I'm here because we have had relatively vast experience in the Revit space, BIM modeling, specifically in healthcare, and recently have had a number of interesting experiences and learning opportunities with BIM 360. So I thought it would be nice to share some of those with everybody and help us all learn and move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. So to get the ball rolling, since the introduction of building information modeling, it's promised to give architects, engineers, contractors, and others insight and tools to more efficiently plan, design and construct, as well as manage buildings and infrastructure. And the word BIM has been a buzzword, for the last couple of years. And now we see the whole concepts of digital twins coming up and trying to reuse all the elements that's happening in the design world. What do you guys, Kevin, I'm going to start with you. What do you feel has been the biggest benefit of collaborative project execution?
Yeah, Jay, I suppose the biggest benefit of collaborative working in the project environment, is particularly in BIM, is you've got the capacity to do live planning. You've got the capacity to see what everybody's doing. So essentially, for a long time, I've preached the ethos of deconstructing silos. And for me, BIM was the only way to actually achieve that. So you deconstruct silos in terms of people holding intelligence in relative data streams, but sharing of that information has always been highly complex, sharing it in a 2D environment and even in a 3D environment. And in highly complex buildings, information sharing in order to coordinate becomes critical. And we've been planning healthcare facilities for the last 30 years, and obviously started in the 2D environment. And for us, what's has really been quite an amazing opportunity is to build the building twice, so that's the other mantra. So we deconstruct information silos, build the building twice, and test it live in a virtual environment before it goes to construction. So the amount of time that you save, the capacity for information sharing, and yeah, it's really just about communication. I mean, essentially we're in the communication world, we're communicating ideas. And to communicate those ideas, you need to adopt an efficient language. And for us, BIM was always the logical option. And in the BIM 360 environment, that's kind of sharing a library. So yeah, it doesn't come easy. I think many hard learning curves, adoption and change management. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, but we certainly haven't looked back since we've adopted BIM. And the BIM 360 environment is certainly giving us traction in terms of our capacity to communicate.
Thank you, Kevin. Hannes, you guys have also adopted the cloud-based technology and work sharing technology now for the last couple of years. What has been the biggest learning curve on your side?
I think, thanks, Jay. I think the biggest learning curve is for everybody to adapt to the change. So I think everybody needs to embrace the new technology and then move forward. I think that has been the biggest shortfall, but using and effectively using it now, I think there's a real up on our efficiency within the company. And I think it makes it much easier to execute complex projects, as Kevin said. So, getting everybody's information as quick as possible and eliminating clashes, and just doing it much quicker than what was the norm.
Thank you, Hannes. Gary, as a BIM manager, do you guys get held up by the ability for you guys to do clash detections, or the rest of the team not being on the platform? Or when you're using the platform, how's that increased your ability to collaborate across projects?
Well, as Kevin mentioned actually earlier on, the biggest issue that we had was or issues that we still in some instances experiencing is how do we share that information with everybody. Having this ability now to use building information modeling not just to generate documentation, but also create a whole cycle of processes that interlinks with one another, speeds up this coordination process, because coordination is not just doing clash detection. It's also having processes in place that can make that we as a stakeholder, as the stakeholders of the project can make informed decisions about what to do, when to do it, and how to go about it. I think how building information modeling has contributed to that in our space and in a BIM manager world is having the ability to share information a little bit more easier in the sense of using a common data environment. And it also speeds up decision making. I've seen that on various projects. And well, in turn, obviously then helps with not just, again, clash detection, but also clash avoidance and various other aspects when it comes to coordination.
Thank you, Gary. Machiel, as one of the people that's quite closely involved in various projects with various clients, how important is the expectations of the project owner and the involvement in the project owner and making sure that the project actually turns out to be a success?
I think this is really, I think it's a growing factor that for project owners to become involved, especially in the BIM process, being able now to see data being transferred between consultants, seeing the models in a space before where it was only 2D environments more so than 3D models, and interacting with those environments. So I think the engagement from project owners has really benefited a lot from this. And for me, one thing that started kind of sticking out over the last few years is there's kind of like no more lies. Everything is becoming more and more visible, opening up communications, opening up, areas where further investigation should be done, which I think helps a lot for making sure projects are streamlined all the way down to the handover stages.
Thank you. Kevin, you mentioned obviously some challenges, some learning curves as you guys have been going through this process. What are some of the key ones that's standing out for you?
Yeah, Jay, that's a tough question. I think, well, when we first adopted BIM, we were obviously in a 2D environment, you know, so essentially what happens in a 2D environment is you get your technical staff are thinking symbolically, representationally. So it's actually a whole change of mindset. It's a whole change of thinking, moving from a 2D modeling world or 2D drawing to 3D modeling. So, yeah, so besides having to change the kind of whole conceptual approach to how software is utilized, I think one of the issues that we do have is adopting of standards, you know, and making sure that you adhere to standards, because there tends to be a little bit of a mindset that in a BIM world, it's a drag and drop grocery basket environment. And that can create chaos in the model. So obviously discipline in a working environment, I think that's key. Understanding what each, and in a collaborative environment, that becomes even more important. You know, the people understand which parts of the model they have access to, which parts of the model they own, how you do change management. So yeah, there's been a lot of learning curves. And I think, you know, one of the biggest, as I said earlier, you know, one of my most frustrating experiences with BIM and with cloud, you know, BIM generally, building information modeling, is people's resistance to change. You know, so you'll find that there's still a lot of consultants out there, and it astounds me. There's a lot of consultants out there that are still working in a 2D environment. We have ongoing frustrations, for example, with structural engineers, because, yeah, for some reason they still insist that they have to do their base design in 2D. So yeah, the overall collaboration and communication, it's not a seamless process, you know, because you're modeling in 3D and because the virtual model is a representation of the actual building, doesn't necessarily mean that there's a seamless communication stream. You know, who does what, who moves what, when there's a clash, who's responsible for first moving the clash. So it's a completely different mindset. So that's one of the big challenges. And then obviously, and on a more negative note, it has to be put on the table, you know, the complexities of licensing. And that's an Autodesk problem that we've experienced firsthand. The licensing is becoming so complex. And obviously the cost of licensing has become a real overhead. This stuff does not come cheap. I mean, there are efficiencies and savings, and there's no turning back from a cost perspective in terms of profitability on a project. You know, there's obviously speed and efficiencies that offset some of the baseline costs. But yeah, I think that there is a lot of space still for BIM as a product to evolve, to simplify, and then obviously the capacity for it to interact with other softwares. You know, it has matured substantially over the last 10 or 20 years. But I'm looking forward to the day where there's a seamless integration of multiple software applications in a single environment. So yeah, the biggest challenge for us is actually getting everybody on board and thinking the same way in terms of their processing of documentation and information. And then the communication aspect of it also. You know, we still find ourselves in 2021 having consultants around the table meetings. So you're never going to do away with that. I think there still is room for that, but you know, what is really nice for us is that we sit in an environment around a table with a big screen, with a live model, and we solve real-time problems in a collaborative environment. So yeah, that's on the plus side. But yeah, getting everybody to deliver, getting everybody to kind of overcome the mindset that the stuff happens autonomously by itself. Yeah, it's not BIM's not a magic wand. BIM's a tool, and like with any tool, it's going to perform as well as you learn to use it. So there's a lot of learning involved.
Thanks, Kevin. Machiel, Kevin sort of pointed out the fact that there should be standards, perhaps standard operating procedures. What role does something like a BIM execution plan play in ensuring the success of a project?
So a BIM execution plan is I want to say in today's age, really a critical factor to make sure the building, the digital building, will be delivered successfully. And ultimately, a BIM execution plan is just how we're going to deliver the 2D environment. How are we going to model up? How are we going to implement standards for this project within our Revit environments or cloud technologies, whatever software you are using within the BIM authoring tools. And it does talk all the way from conceptual stages to hand over to the facility management. So for decision making throughout the whole process, I believe a BIM execution plan is called a staple we need to start implementing more and more on our BIM projects.
Thanks, Machiel. So we got a couple of project owners on the call today as well. So guys, please feel free to put some Q&A questions in the space. Hannes, something on your end. How in the last 4 to 5 years, how has the demands on projects changed as building owners start learning about digital twins or using data better for managing their buildings? Has there been a change on your side?
Yes, Jay, I think certainly. I think some clients do embrace the technology. Other clients still don't care much about it. But I think the guys that do embrace it, they get a better service and and if they force the consultants, as Kevin said, if some consultants is not on BIM or on the Autodesk packages, then it really makes it a bit of an issue. So yeah, I think the clients that push it and push their professional teams to use it, they certainly will get the benefit of it. Especially in the long term, I mean, those models are live, they are all built, they can use it for afterwards as a complete set of their documentation, even if they want to alterate the building or whatever they want to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And Garry, what is the main benefit of sort of having this visibility of what's happening on a project, in terms of design issues or possible clashes, coordination and stuff like that, using that data? What benefit have you guys found in that?
So, excuse me, I don't know if you can hear, I do sound a little flu-ish. I am struggling a bit with the flu, but I'm getting through it. So I think if it was Machiel that mentioned something about transparency. So having all this information available to everybody and anybody on the project. Obviously with certain limitations depending on where you are in your design, whether you're in a work in progress process, or if you've shared the information, or if the information has been published for construction, depending on where the information sits. The transparency of the information does assist with, once again, decision making. Also, you have the ability to identify where you're going to have certain loopholes within the process, and also, you're not using it as a policing tool, but because there's transparency, nobody can basically say that they haven't either seen the information or read the information, if I can get it, if I can put it that way. From a benefit point of view, because we have this information available, readily available, depending on how it's been shared, you don't have to wait for information. If you're working, depending on how your project is set up, if you're working in a live environment where you're doing live linking, The constant change that happens in the model for updating information assists to a certain point. Then when you're moving into a more controlled sharing environment, that you then have the knowledge that the information that you've received has been checked, it has been verified, and you can carry on with either your design process or your coordination process. I think the biggest benefit that we've experienced with applying, cloud solutions in our process is the availability of information and how you can use that information to your benefit, and also highlight any areas of concern at a very early stage in the process. I think if I can maybe just add on to Machiel with regards to a BIM execution plan, I think the important part about a BIM execution plan is not just to have this document, but actually have this document as a live document through the life cycle of the process or the building process. It's pointless that we have all these processes in place and all these structures in place, but nobody really takes the time to actually go and read it, number one, and number two, implement it. And just to add onto what Kevin also mentioned, with regards to having consultants, still some consultants working in 2D environments still, I think how we can mitigate these issues is in a BIM execution plan and a BIM kickoff. It is important that if you start a project and your entire team is not working in an environment that is going to support your BIM goals, then there's certain decisions that needs to be made, right? And there's nothing stopping us from a communication point of view to be upfront. The last couple of projects that we've been working on, we've been stern, and with the assistance of the client, which is also the very key factor here, with the assistance of the client, it in some instances became mandatory that you have to fulfill a certain requirement to actually work on this project. We're not obviously in the business of deciding who's getting work and who's not getting work, but if you can't contribute to the success of the project through various processes that is going to be implemented, you are going to be a barrier. That's just my 5 cents.
Thank you, Garry. Kevin, what has been the impact on your business? In introducing some of the collaborative project execution. Getting more and more of the project team together, working on a platform, running live clash detections or coordination meetings. Have you guys been able to quantify that at all, or what's that process been like?
Yeah, just that's an interesting question, and obviously there's a financial component to it initially, or maybe coming out of the blocks, there's a financial component in terms of your resourcing on a project. And yeah, we found that, and as the industry has matured, to I think Garry or Hannes' point, you find that you have to have highly trained and highly competent technical staff. It's the days of having people sitting doing window schedules and door schedules in one corner and other people doing floor finishes. Those days are long gone, and I think the practices and the professionals that aren't realizing and that aren't staying current with developments in the BIM world, they're going to get left behind. It's not just a case of selecting a consultant now on their competency in a design environment or their efficiency. I think it's becoming a fairly technical and complex process selecting consultants. But for me, our biggest benefit has been in terms of resourcing. So you find that the more competent your resource, the smaller your team can be, and although the competent resources are demanding higher salaries, and higher remuneration packages, the overall project cost, we able to absorb the kind of discounts that the industry is insisting on at the moment. So not to say that we're remaining as profitable as we used to be, but had we not adopted BIM, I think we wouldn't have existed anymore. There's just no ways that we could absorb the kind of fee discounts that developers and clients are insisting on anymore. But to your point on client adoption, we're currently busy with a project where the client, who is a QS developer with a substantial track record working on very big projects, being his first exposure to BIM and the collaborative BIM particularly, he's got full access to the project. And we were in a meeting with him the other day, and he turned around and he said, he's done plenty of projects, but he will never again work on a project that's not on the cloud, and where his consultants are not BIM efficient and working in BIM, because the capacity for him to stay in touch with what's happening from a design perspective and design development perspective is astronomical. I mean, he's been gloating the last couple of months. He's really acknowledging that this is really the only way to do projects. So besides an advantage in terms of resourcing financially, the other real advantage is that you suddenly have the capacity to be communicating in real time with your client, and for them to truly understand what the product is that the team is developing and working on. So there is no other way to communicate. And I started the discussion earlier saying that essentially consultants they're in two worlds. We're in the world of risk mitigation. So in other words, mitigating risk in terms of the clash detection, errors, the need to reconstruct or demolish. That's a risk mitigation environment, and certainly the BIM 360 and the BIM world, we found enormous value in that space. But just in terms of the capacity to communicate and trust, the client suddenly develops a real trust, because there's a very in-depth understanding of what it is that the team's trying to achieve. So, yeah, I think that about sums it up for us. The capacity to communicate, mitigate risk, and there's obviously a financial advantage from a resourcing perspective.
Can you touch on an interesting subject there? One of the concerns that has been raised in the past is, if a client becomes involved in that design development process so closely and can actually see what's happening, that it might slow down the process. Have you found that it actually sped up the process?
Sorry, just give me a sec.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I mean, it sped up the process enormously. I think essentially one of the big issues for us, and we've got a lot of repeat clients. Obviously, we're a 35-year-old practice. A lot of our clients are corporate. A lot of our clients are repeat. But the one key element in terms of the consultant's role and our processes is trust. You need to trust the client. The client needs to trust you. It really is a high trust environment. So I've also heard lots of comments from various consultants, that clients should only be exposed to certain elements and components of the projects, which for me has always been a ridiculous statement. Clients need to be completely involved, and there needs to be a complete transparency. You're going to be making mistakes. There's going to be changes. It's a development process, and it's a live development process. So, what we found previously is that when you're giving your clients screen clips and static shots of the progress of a project, there's an element of frustration, because the project evolves, and it's then left up to the client to try and interpret and understand how the project is maturing and developing in a screenshot environment. So, on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, in terms of hard copy drawings, finger pointing to lines and diagrams. It's absurd, actually, to think that a client could be expected to trust a team of consultants, to actually trust the process to deliver an end product that he's got in mind. Essentially, as consultants, we are conduits. We're conduits of the client's thinking and requirements, whether it's a financial, I mean, there's obviously that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, for me, it's absurd that the client shouldn't be fully involved and integrate and have full access to all information at all times.
Thank you, Kevin. Machiel, you've recently completed a project that ran the whole process, the BIM process. What has been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned or seen happen in the last couple of weeks?
So, so the project that I was part of was more on the adoption of the cloud technologies from the construction point of view. And what was kind of, I want to say, key takeaways I've taken away from the project on a more skill level. One of the things was your coordinations between your different consultants' models is of critical point to make sure that your base is always set up correct. And I'm not just talking about the coordinates here, but like your standard for the project, how the models integrate, you know, all of those kind of standard processes needs to be well placed from the beginning of the project. Because it just hampers and makes the project process a lot worse later on. Then that was more on the design side. And looking at the construction side, for me, the biggest challenge on the project was to help the contractors adopt this technology. And from my point of view, I think it's the contractors, it's not that they're not willing to do it. I think currently their biggest challenge is there's so many systems that they have to adapt to, that every project has a different cloud technology, a way of doing things, a way stuff needs to be adopted, which puts a little bit of strain on them to keep up with all the technologies. But, you know, on the project itself, the contractors adopted the various RFI workflows that was introduced, quality checks and things like that, which was really quite a nice way of seeing it. The project manager on the project really enjoyed the fact that he had more control, not control is the wrong word, but he had more visibility of what was happening in the project. Like Kevin also mentioned, it's the engagement level was a lot better and everyone was more aware of what was happening on the project itself. And I think the last stakeholder, the client that bought into the system, made licenses available for this project. For him, it was really a benefit to be able to have discussions around the model. Like Kevin also mentions, you can actually see the file, you can see the RFIs. You don't have to be put inside of every process, but you are more aware of what was happening. And it did also in this project streamline communication with the client and the rest of the consulting team.
Something quite interesting about that project, I remember that the client invested in the common data environment himself. How's that affecting handover of the project at the end of the day?
So actually for them, the handover is quite simple because the project was on their cloud storage. It was really, well, on their hub. It was really like the consulting team just jumped off the project. All the files are there, information is there, and there we go. The item that caused a little bit of frustration is the project was done for a tenant, and the tenant is now looking for information in a specific structured way. So it's now just a way of reformatting folders and adding the correct data to that, and then providing a download link to the client. But what's nice, it's all the information as you're generating it lives within the CDE, the common data environment, and it's really just taking it down, sharing it with the next guy, or inviting the person to that environment with limited access, which also simplifies your next client or next tenant through the process.
And I think there's so much more possibilities there. Just a reminder to everybody that's attending the discussion, please feel free to post any questions you might have for the panelists in the Q&A box, or even in the chat box should you want to. Garry, what has been your biggest win as well as biggest frustration as you guys have been rolling out this collaborative project environment?
Let me start with frustration, is change management. I think the biggest challenge, and it's attributed to us being human beings. We are creatures of habit, and if something has been done a certain way for a very long time, we tend to not want to partake in new ways of doing things. I think that was the biggest frustration that I had, and not just only with the extended professional team, but also internally with my team as well. Is understanding, you know, why we're doing certain things differently and why we're doing it in a more collaborative approach way. Is to obviously speed up decision making and speeding up coordination issues that can be resolved fairly easily. One of my biggest wins was being able to see my CEO open up BIM 360 and doing a presentation with a client of ours in the UK. I think that was one of my biggest wins. He's fully supportive with what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve as a company, and how we've changed our digital process within the company. But he was never really part of the, you know, from a design perspective. And there's a few projects that he's now actually being fairly involved from a design perspective, which has now encouraged him to obviously partake in this. And then that was for me quite nice to see, where it wasn't a matter of him calling on me to do the presentation, but it was him driving it from his side, which was good. I think that was my win that I'm going to
Fantastic. Thank you, Garry. Hannes, the same question on your side. What has been your biggest frustration / biggest achievement or win as you guys implemented, not necessarily BIM 360, but the whole process of BIM?
I think I'll start with the positive one, linking to what Garry said. We also had actually a medical facility we were working on, and we weren't initially on the job, and we just had to do the earthworks and came up with savings on earthworks. And the client asked us to look at alternatives, and we were able to show them the civil 3D model within 3 days, and that actually landed us the job. I think that was still one of our biggest accomplishments. And in terms of frustration, I think the biggest frustration for me in BIM is that all the contractors is not using the software fully. Because, I mean, we as consultants, or some of the consultants, are really driving BIM, and everybody's collaborating and working in the same environment. But now when you go to site, the contractor don't use a 3D model. We still have to generate 2D, and especially on the structural side, there's a real mission, and there's only a handful of contractors that make use of this. So, for me, the contractors need to catch up, and I think then we can talk the same language as the guys in the UK and the US and how they implement their projects.
Thank you, Hannes. Kevin, your side?
Sorry, Dave. Our biggest win, the biggest frustration. I mean, I agree. I think we really need to get this. The software, we need to get it to ground to the contractors, because it is a very frustrating. We are modeling, integrating, coordinating, collaborating, and when it gets to the physical production of documentation, it still becomes pretty antiquated, unless the contractor has. And we've had nice experiences with some contractors that are relatively mature in the space, and we've seen a phenomenal difference in terms of their performance and their claims, and some of the confusion around what the expectations are. But it's going to take a while to ripple right through the industry. You've also got your main contractor that's leading the process. But your subcontractors, it needs to become a fully inclusive environment, and it will get to that point. I think, I'm not sure how long it's going to take for it to mature, but certainly the contractors that we've worked with that are competent and capable of accessing and utilizing the tool have found an enormous benefit, and so for the whole project has benefited in those instances. But the biggest frustration is developing a fully integrated, coordinated, collaborative model in a 3D space, and then having to reduce it back to 2D drawings, and controlling information flow and drawing issue in the traditional drawing register kind of format. And yeah, the frustration is that kind of requirement to be flexible, to be able to flex backwards and forwards, to go kind of old traditional route out of a highly complex and advanced 3D environment. You need to be able to weather and tether the limitations in the industry. So that's still very frustrating. It's you're kind of taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. Not to say it doesn't have its advantages in any event, but if we can again break down that silo and start working collaboratively with the contractor as part of the team, I think then we're going to find ourselves in a very different building environment.
Thank you, Kevin. We have a question from Byron, who usually does the BIM managing? And then the second question following on that, does there need to be a BIM manager from the inception of the project? I'm just going to open that one up to the panel, and if you guys want to answer, just please go ahead. Garry.
So it is important that you have, in actual fact, you need to appoint the client needs to appoint a BIM manager on the job. And currently we're not doing that, if I can say, in South Africa. In most cases, the BIM manager role or the BIM managing role is generally taken up by the lead on the project. For example, if the architect is the lead on the project, they would generally then have a person that is going to be doing the BIM management. And then in most cases, that BIM manager is actually either an architect that is actually working on the project, and in some instances, an engineer that is working on the project. It should actually be a separate role because there's quite a bit of things that needs to be done from a planning and processing point of view. So yes, a BIM manager is needed on a job, generally appointed by the client. If not, it has to come from anyone that has actually got the ability within the professional team to do it. That would be my go-to.
Mm-hmm. I would just want to come in there, Jay. I think what Garry just said.
We just lost you there. Yeah.
What Garry just said made me think. In terms of project management, I think there's a real opportunity there for project managers to get on board and fulfill that role. I think that's something that, from a structural and civil engineering side, we typically not really look forward to do. But I think as a project manager, those guys can really take all the data and really add value to a project in terms of programming and planning, and then also clash detection, taking over that role from any of the other consultants. I think that might be a real plus.
Mm-hmm. Comments from your side, Machiel?
So coming a little bit more technical, talking about the ISO standards and call it the global BIM principles put in place. The way I read the documentation and really understand it is, yes, the client ideally should have a representative from their side managing it and call that person a BIM lead. From there, every consulting firm has their own BIM manager appointed to make sure that their internal workflows and data management and things like that complies to the project side of things. So that's kind of a whole little bit of ecosystem on its own, which really currently in our country, we don't have that kind of vast majority of skill levels. So I think that is why Garry mentioned it, why the kind of who's ever the lead on the project runs the BIM management process. The second portion is, and it's also tying to what Hannes is saying, that different stages of the project, you have different people taking different responsibilities. So if we had to look at the coordination, the clash detection of a project, that is typically where the BIM manager from the architect would then take the lead of that portion, the project execution, and run that process. So I think there's a a whole new way of how we need to look at this ecosystem and growing it. But for me, one of the first wins would be that clients, developers, they would become really the first guys to say, we need someone on this project that has the skills and the capability levels to run the BIM portion of it, making sure the whole project starts aligning a lot better to BIM execution plans from the start to the finish, to make sure that your handover files is as what the clients need for the longer term of the asset of the building itself.
Fantastic. Thank you, Machiel. I see we're almost out of time. Just any last comments anybody wants to make, anybody wants to ask? Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, Kevin.
Before you jump off, I think, obviously you guys have hosted this webinar, but I think that you can't, certainly from our perspective as an end user and having had a fairly long history and track record with yourselves, the role of your reseller and the support that they provide is critical. So choosing the right reseller, and it's not a plug for Modena, or maybe it's a slight plug, but you guys have really been incredible in terms of the way that you provide support, guide people through processes of adoption, and your enthusiasm for the whole product. You're not merely just selling a product into the environment. You actually are hand-holding people through the adoption process and training and trying to accelerate the adoption of BIM and the cloud-based. So yeah, from our side, choosing the right reseller and making sure that you take advantage of the support that gets offered from someone like yourselves goes a long way to solving many of the issues. It's not trying to learn how to ride a bicycle by yourself. You need support. You need those training wheels, and you guys have certainly offered that in this space.
Thank you for your kind words, Kevin. So just to end off today, thank you for everybody joining. Please look out. We are working on a collaborative workshop using some of the new tools like Mural to have a conversation and a user-centered design session around better project execution and what we as an industry can change and how we can change it as we start moving forward. So that's something we are planning for everybody in the beginning of the new year, because we firmly believe in that if we can raise the tide, all the ships will raise. And construction has been historically known as being one of the most wasteful industries around the world, and that's certainly our purpose, is to help reduce that wastage and help people build better buildings. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for joining our session. I think the session has been recorded, so we will make it available for everybody else. And once again, thank you. And we're on the hour. So Kevin, Hannes, Garry, Machiel, thank you very much for making your time available. And we'll be in contact with you guys soon.
Really a pleasure, Jay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, everybody.